Yes, excuse me. My name is Nelson Wax from MB Group USA, and we're a tenant here at the BioInc Incubator. We are cultivators of two kinds of fruits in Africa, miracle berry and the uli plant. The miracle berry is a taste modifier, specifically targeted for chemotherapy patients who have metallic taste and are not able to eat or drink, whereas the uli plant produces a sweetener that's about 1,500 times as potent as sugar, with very little calories, and it's thermally and heat stable, so you can cook with it. My question is actually to each one of you, because I'm interested in your services. So on the FDA, we are going to soon be importing these fruits, which will have to be brought in as frozen. And I'm sure there's going to be some challenges with the FDA, even though they're fruits, so the USDA is really the primary concern. But the FDA usually likes to put in their foot into the process. What would you recommend as one of the first things that we have to make sure in this process that we have under our belt to prevent any potential issues?
Right, and while Jules is formulating his response, could you, just for sake of time, could you also give your question for Craig?
Yes, and the question for Craig is, from the IP patents, because there is going to be a processing involved in the formulation, which we're going to hopefully be working with the New York Medical College in this process in a collaborative manner, what would be the primary objective that we need to make sure that we have protected as we start moving forward in a pre-revenue type of business?
Okay, so
Thank you.
yeah, so I would open up a dialogue.
I'm going to sit down so I don't.
Okay, sure. Well, no. So I would open up a dialogue with FDA. I mean, if you know, with USDA, I don't. The closest we had was treating meat with carbon monoxide to make it stay red and kind of thing. But we had a discussion with USDA, so I'd say if there's anything to do with importing the fruits, that would be agriculture. But I think in terms of anything to do with taste masking and all of that, and exactly how you're going to do it, I would open up a dialogue with FDA and probably ask for a Type C meeting and talk to them. And what you have to do in order to do that, you have to create a dossier, maybe 20 pages, you know, not a lot, maybe with some supporting documents, and tell them exactly, I mean, first we do the homework, you know, make sure, see exactly what you have, and then have a meeting with FDA, see what claims we want to make, how we want to use it, etc. So whatever FDA issues there are separate from USDA issues, we clearly identify.
Thank you.
Yeah, but you should definitely don't just try to read it. You have to go down and talk to them.
Thanks, Jules. Craig?
There's potentially a lot of IP there. The first question would be whether the plant itself ever would have existed in nature, or if the plant was something that was engineered, because you can actually get protection on a non-natural plant. The next question would be, if this plant had not been cultivated artificially, would this sweetener ever have existed? If the answer to that question is no, then the sweetener is an artificial compound. That, as a chemical compound itself, may in fact be patented. Perhaps the process of generating the artificial plant may have IP. Definitely the process of extracting the sweetener from the plant has IP. Then in addition to that, purified forms of the sweeteners itself, uses of the sweetener in generating some kind of a food product, there are multiple layers of IP here, all from the stage of developing the plant to developing the sweetener to the uses of the sweetener. You can actually get a platform of IP out of this, I believe.
Thank you.
So I think that turns out not only to be an interesting question, but I think a very good stimulus for that level of discussion, of taking things to that level of approval and thinking ahead about doing these steps so that you're not doing it sequentially, but you're moving forward in series, in parallel and not in tandem or in series. I also heard some comments this morning that, you know, for me as fundamentally a clinician are so important. We talked about the patient as being the end user and not just the health professional, the surgeon, or the operator of the device. device or an IT system. I fervently believe that the greatest advances that we have made have been at the level, maybe it's an analogy to that last mile that we sometimes talk about. It's that last few steps to get to the actual patient and change the way that they can predict their disease, they can manage it when it comes, they can understand it, and do all of the things that result in better outcomes. We know that medicine and healthcare will never be perfect, but the more we can improve with each successive year, the way that we prevent, predict, manage, and treat, and respond to and prevent complications of disease, those are the greatest fruits of our labor. And I think we should have enormous respect for each other as colleagues working in this, not just profession, but this calling to make lives better for everybody. I know we hear that all the time, but it really is true. I think we have time for a couple more questions. There's also some flurry outside as we get ready for the ribbon cutting, and there will be some elected officials arriving. So fortunately, we have Dr. Jeff Laskin standing front and center with a great question. Dr. Laskin.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jeff Laskin from Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. And working with Diane Heck here at the New York Medical College, we have a $30 million grant sponsored by the National Institutes of Health to develop countermeasures or antidotes to chemicals that might be used for terrorism, which applications to the civilian population as well as to militaries. I sort of I was intrigued by one of your comments before that with us academics, and we are a bit, as Jules Mitchell will attest to, a bit slow in developing some of our intellectual property. But you mentioned something about that if we're planning on giving a seminar or presentation and you were a little concerned about us revealing our intellectual property without protecting it first, and you suggested simply sending it to the patent office, I think. And I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. Did you mean it in context of like filing a digital patent, or, and were there limitations to that? I didn't quite understand the process that you were referring to.
Exactly, filing a quick provisional patent application. Basically, anything can be a provisional patent application. You can take a manuscript submitted to a journal, take that as is, submit it to the patent office. The one caveat I would give you is I would remove the names of any people, I would remove the names of any institutions, just so you don't have questions about who the real owner of this is. Send it in anonymized, scrub out anything too sensitive. I've done the same thing with PowerPoint slides. I've done the same thing with clinical trial protocols. If we have a client who's starting a clinical trial, we tell them, send us your protocol. We'll scrub it up, we'll anonymize it, but we will submit your clinical trial protocol to the patent office as a provisional application. Then when you have real data, we'll go back and write a real patent application using some of the experiments and protocols that were described in that clinical trial.
So you wouldn't have to file a claims, and is there time constraints involved in this?
Once you file a provisional application, you have 1 year to move ahead with a finalized patent application. And about that time, you'll want to start thinking about what your claims have to be. When you originally put in what I'll call a technical disclosure as a provisional application, you don't need to have any claims. You don't even really need to know what the final invention is going to be. You have 1 year to figure that out.
Thank you.
We're going to start the ribbon cutting in about 10 minutes, but sir, if you have a quick question, we can do one more.
I'm Dr. Wells. I have a biotech company here in Rochester, and I have a product which is the patent shown to be biotechnology. The product is essentially an antibody targeting human CDR signal. So I've been trying to get additional funding. I have SDR startup money, and I'm going to find out about in phase 2. But I don't think that the amount for the angel investors is something that's reasonable to really move ahead. Where do I go from this point? How do I find a venture or another?
No, I don't deal with them. I have an MBA, but I leave the Wall Street people alone.
If you're at a point where you're beyond where angels can help you, you will probably need to get involved with some venture capital groups. There's also the possibility of doing something like getting involved with capital groups are where you can get $10 million from a Series A and really take the invention to the next level. I guess my question for you is, how long would it be until you have output? How long would it be until you have information? And I ask that because when you're at a critical phase in development, sometimes when you say this to an investor, their answer will be, okay, come back and talk to me when you have this information.
Right.
And that kind of puts you in a pickle, and what do I want to do? Do I want to go ahead with this? What if I get bad data? Sometimes the best time to talk to an investor is actually before you've submitted something and they aren't in a position to say, I don't want to talk until we see the data. There are VCs out there, though, who really do have an interest in early stage companies. People think of VCs as someone who puts $50 million into a company that's already made it. There are VCs out there who will put $2 to $5 million in a company that's at an early stage. Those are the kinds of people that you should probably be talking to right now. They'll be a little bit more sympathetic of the fact that the technology is incomplete. But even if the regulatory isn't quite there yet, they will still be interested in seeing what kind of IP you've gotten around it. And you should be able to present to them what kind of IP you think you will be able to get once you have something regulatory. And as long as you don't have that answer yet, you should also be prepared to explain to them, what's my backup compound? What's my strategy for moving forward if I don't get the information that I want out of these experiments?
Also, I wouldn't discount the role of angel investors. The roles of angels have increased significantly over the years to where they are making more significant investments in earlier stage companies. So don't discount that fast.
I'm also not discount going to pharma companies. Some of them
I've
now,
done that, and I'm in.
you turn it down, well, you go to Pfizer and early Pfizer?
No, I'm actually in contact with Jen, because they're in that area, so, but that's where I've gone, and I think they're waiting to see the phase 2, you know, if I get the phase 2 funding, which is, I don't know, for 6 months, and I don't really want to wait, I think it's a waste of time. So what I'd like to do is, I'd like to them for sponsoring funding, to bring it to a certain point. And they really, every time they come up with something else I need to do, I basically looked at the FDA requirements, and I've done everything except for the things that are really expensive.
I think what I would probably do if you're phase knowing when you're going to get an answer is actually seek bridge financing. Bridge financing is basically, instead of getting a convertible note at the beginning of your company, you get a convertible note for a small amount of money between big investments. That's something that you can get from an investor who's willing to take a little more risk with a lot less information. It would be a smaller amount of money, a couple $100,000 as opposed to the few million that you're probably looking for in the long run. But that would be a way to keep you going until you have that output. Then you'd be in a better position to go back and seek the big Series A or Series B that you're going to really going to need.
How do I get a
I'm
list
going to
of
call
these
time,
things?
gentlemen, but thank you very much. Great speakers, great questions, great audience. It was a great session.